All right, folks, it's Wednesday night at 9 o'clock Eastern Time, 8 o'clock in the Central Time Zone. Welcome to SEC Breakdown. We talk SEC football 24/7, 365. And with the Georgia and with the Tennessee camps just concluded, we're going to dive into the Dogs and the Vols, who could be battling again for the SEC Eastern Division. Of course, the usual cast of characters when we talk about Mike Loveall, also working for Last Word on Sports, and David Waters. Please join us at SEC Breakdown on Twitter, and we pump out tons of content and analysis right there and post these videos on Mark Rogers TV, and that would be me, Mark Rogers. This week's guest, we got Jeremy Attaway. He is obviously a dedicated and knowledgeable Georgia guy. He's making dog. Follow him there on Twitter. Jeremy, appreciate you stopping by. You can also catch Jeremy's work at dogsports.com. So, Jeremy, of course, the Georgia game just completed. You wrap up spring practice after about 15 sessions. Your thoughts about what the Dogs look like on Saturday, maybe even a little bit more important, what's really stood out for you about Kirby Smart's first run at Georgia and seeing them on the field for the first time after that month of practices?
Well, Kirby Smart comes out of his first spring practice at Georgia kind of like ludicrous. He's looking, smelling, feeling like $1 million. Has a day where he gets 93,000 plus Georgia fans to show up in Athens. A lot of people thought that wouldn't happen. In fact, it looks like they had over 93,000 people standing in the aisles, standing in the breezeways. A lot of excitement around the program, which after some of the acrimony surrounding Mark Richt's ouster was really something that the program frankly needed. Also got to see the new look Georgia offense, at least some bare bones aspects of it, with Jim Chaney taking the lead there. Saw some great things there. Got to see several quarterbacks throw the ball around. Saw some young guys on defense who did some things that we maybe didn't know that they could do. All in all, not a lot of negative from that Saturday in Athens.
Yeah, Jeremy, I'm going to jump in right here, and we know what we saw from, the freshman phenom Jacob Eason is definitely the highlights and the headlines that we saw from the spring game. And I'll kind of dive in, with what he did, it got a lot of people thinking, is he already ready to start? What's the perfect scenario for Eason to start? If Kirby names him the starter for the opener versus North Carolina, what's the message that's being sent? Is it that the Dogs are ready to win now? Or is it for Eason to build towards 2017, by getting a season under his belt?
Yeah, Kirby Smart has addressed this to some extent, and I think it's been pretty clear that he is not going to put Jacob Eason in there to start until he feels like Jacob Eason is the guy who's ready to take the lead with that offense. I've said, and I still maintain, that there's an excellent chance that you see one of the two returning quarterbacks, either Grayson Lambert or perhaps maybe Bryce Ramsey, who we haven't seen start some games, but has shown a lot of great talent when he's been in there. You could see one of those guys against North Carolina. I think what you see is a situation that's very reminiscent of what Georgia did in 2006 under Mark Richt, with Matt Stafford coming in, where Stafford saw action from very early in the season, and you could see that he clearly had the most raw talent of any of the quarterbacks Georgia had that year. But he made freshman mistakes. Kirby Smart has told us that Jacob Eason's been making some freshman mistakes in practice. We saw him do some of that on Saturday. There were some reads that were not great. There were some throws that were maybe just a little bit rushed. And again, that's with no real rush, not being taken to the ground. So there's work to be done there. If Jacob Eason is starting from day one against North Carolina, Georgia fans should be exceptionally excited because that will mean that he's outdueled Grayson Lambert, a guy who, for better or worse, has started and actually played some pretty good football, both for Georgia and Virginia.
Hey, Jeremy, I'd like to ask you a real quick question about Georgia. A lot of hype coming in with Kirby Smart coming over from Alabama. Kirby Smart's historically been a defensive guy. A lot of people talking about the quarterbacks there in Georgia. Georgia finished last year kind of in a lull offensively. You had a running back hurt, but last season, at the end of last season, the offense was kind of slow moving. Can you talk to me about the impact you think Jim Chaney is going to have taking over the offense? Is he going to have total control of the offense? Is Kirby Smart going to play a role? And what's going to change with Georgia's offense with Jim Chaney as the offensive coordinator?
Mike, first I want to congratulate you on the very political use of the word lull for the Brian Schottenheimer offense. We here in Georgia prefer soul crushing. But yeah, Kirby Smart has made very clear that it's Jim Chaney's offense, and two things that he likes about Jim Chaney's offense, and two of the things that he brought him to Athens to do. One, develop young quarterbacks. Jacob Eason really seriously considered going elsewhere after Mark Richt and Brian Schottenheimer left. Jim Chaney was really the one who righted the ships. With that, he's a guy who has taken quarterbacks like Tyler Bray at Tennessee and really helped those guys develop. Drew Brees, of course, probably his most famous pupil. So the other thing that you're going to see that Kirby Smart has already talked about a couple of times this spring is he likes Jim Chaney's use of the tight end. And one of the things that we saw on G-Day is that even in a very bare-bones offense, not really showing very much of what they'll do eventually, and with Jeb Blazevich, who's actually the starting tight end, not catching any passes at all, Georgia still threw the tight end 15 times on the day. Now, some of that's a little bit outsized. Georgia only ran the ball a total of 26 times on the day, threw 83 passes, and frankly, that's because anyone who watched the Georgia offense in 2015 knows that it's the passing game that needs a heck of a lot of work. What you're going to see from Jim Chaney, I think, is going to be a lot of use of the tight end. You're going to see them get the ball, hopefully, to some of the running backs that Georgia has, like Sony Michel, who actually have very good hands. That's something that Jim Chaney has done a good bit of at every stop that he's been at. And I think you're also going to see a lot of power running, because that's something that Kirby Smart has talked about, that he wants to be a team that controls the line of scrimmage and controls time of possession with the offense. It's going to be smash mouth football. I think when you get right down to it, what we hope, I think Georgia fans will tell you they are yearning for, is to see some smash mouth football with a little bit of a cerebral flair to it, something other than the Hulk smash offense of Brian Schottenheimer that a lot of times in 2015 really did not get them anywhere.
Jeremy, I'll jump in on the other side of the ball, and Kirby Smart, he learned under Nick Saban for years, and it was Jeremy Pruitt also kind of had that same background as well. What's the stamp that was probably the main focus that Smart's going to harp on first on the defensive side of the ball to make sure that this is his defense and not anything from the past?
Yeah, scheme-wise, I think it's going to be sort of a case of meet the new defense, same as the old defense. Schematically, it's going to be very similar. Jeremy Pruitt and Kirby Smart both run sort of an adaptation of what Nick Saban does. Pruitt probably a little more multiple on the defensive front in terms of using some of those 4-4 looks and 4-2-5 looks. Kirby Smart has done at Alabama. But the big thing that Kirby Smart's going to do in terms of putting a stamp on this defense is something that he's talked about from day one. He, quite frankly, sort of challenged the Georgia roster when he got to town and said, we're not tough enough. This team is just not where we need to be in terms of playing physical defensive football. And that really shouldn't be a surprise to anyone who watched Georgia play against his Alabama defense last October. It was pretty clear from the get-go that one of those teams was just physically superior to the other, had more depth than the other, was bigger, faster, and stronger than the other. And so, in bringing in Coach Sinclair and some of the new folks in strength and conditioning, focusing on explosiveness training. They're going to be doing that. But really, a lot of this spring has just been about finding guys who are physically tough, who can play football. And that's going to be an ongoing process that I think you're going to see early in 2016.
Jeremy, we talk about it all the time, just alluding to your last statement that 2012 Georgia defense, one of the more talented units that I've seen in the SEC, and just maybe didn't have that toughness, that grit, that grind, that tenacity that you need out of a defense, especially in this conference. I've got to hit you up with two things here. First of all, the Kirby Smart stamp on this program. Have we seen it? I know you haven't played a real game yet, but any differences that you can conclude between the Mark Richt regime and what we've seen out of Smart thus far?
You know, it's been sort of interesting to watch Kirby Smart work. One thing that was really, quite frankly, a little unnerving for some Bulldog fans is that he tells people to call him Kirby, not Coach Smart. That doesn't just go for recruits who he's trying to appear young and hip to. That goes for coaches. That goes for visiting high school coaches. That goes for parents. That goes for players. He's been called Kirby, and he just prefers for people to do that. It's a very personal kind of touch. There's been a lot of enthusiasm that you've seen, and I think that's a big part of his stamp on the program. You know, Mark Richt could be very enthusiastic as a coach when he wanted to be, but I think coming from that Bobby Bowden school, he kind of learned to temper that sometimes, and it was something that he used selectively. Mark Richt was never really much of a rah-rah kind of guy on the sidelines, and we're getting the impression you're going to see a very different kind of look from Kirby Smart. He has made pretty clear that he's going to be himself, and Kirby's self is pretty high octane. That's going to be something important for this team. The other thing that he's made pretty clear that's been a big stamp is that no one gets to take anything for granted. Every single day, the positions are up for battle, and there's not going to be any entitlement. There's not going to be any resting on prior laurels. That's something that a lot of Georgia fans were very happy about, because there was a sense under Mark Richt that sometimes veteran guys who might not necessarily have as much talent and might not be putting in the effort that they should were nevertheless kind of getting the benefit of the doubt. And having that taken out of the equation is something that a lot of fans are very excited about.
Jeremy, I think we have you back sometime and we talk about the Mark Richt era at Georgia, because I think there's some controversy in regards to, hey, this guy was a class act, first class coach on the field, off the field, really could relate to players, was a good guy, great character, won 75% of his games. How do you let him go? Versus the Georgia faithful clamoring for a championship and saying, hey, enough's enough, we got to get this guy out the door, we got to hit that next level. That would be a fascinating discussion, especially with Mr. Waters and Mr. Loveall with their thoughts about SEC football and the coaching situation in particular. But I got one more thing for you, Jeremy. It's in terms of recruiting. So when I think Georgia football, I think top 5, top 10 talent. We've had the discussion here that Atlanta metro area is phenomenal in regards to bringing in some of the top athletes in the country. My thing has been with the dynamic playmakers on the outside. We see a Chris Conley not produce much in college, go to the NFL Combine, and just jump out of the dome. Malcolm Mitchell was a nice player, but not really, again, a game changer. It's been interesting to see those kind of players not on the roster the last few years for the Georgia Bulldogs.
Yeah, that's been something that's been a constant sort of thorn in the side of Bulldog fans. And, of course, Keith Marshall is another great example of that, a guy who goes to the NFL Combine this year and runs the third fastest 40-yard dash time for a tailback ever at the Combine. Was essentially on a milk carton for most of his last year in Athens. Little used, talent. That's going to be something that's going to be interesting to see with Kirby Smart. No one's ever said that Georgia doesn't have talent. Georgia perennially has top 5, top 10 recruiting classes. The thing is, talent-wise, the Georgia roster really, if you look at it, all the way from slot 1 to slot 85 is not that Alabama roster that Kirby Smart had. No roster in college football is, quite frankly, other than perhaps LSU's. The depth of talent Alabama is going to be that's something that Georgia just doesn't have. First step for Kirby Smart is going to be to keep as much talent as he can in-state. Just got a big commitment from 2017 from Notori Johnson, a guy from Cedar Grove High School in Ellenwood, Metro Atlanta, national top 100 player, top offensive lineman in the state. You get him, keep him in-state. That's going to be step 1 for Kirby Smart, is keeping that talent in-state. But Mark Richt did a pretty decent job of that. Step 2 is going to be developing it. And he's already taken some steps to doing that. Brought in Sam Pittman as the offensive line coach from Arkansas, a guy who's perhaps the best in the business at what he does. James Coley to coach wide receivers, a guy who coached some really talented players at Miami. It's not going to just fall to Kirby Smart. That development job is going to fall to that entire staff, and really put together a pretty good staff. We're just going to have to see if they can do a better job of that than the prior staff.
Jeremy Attaway is the Macon Dog on Twitter. Please join him there. Also on dogsports.com. Jeremy, we can let you go if you need to go, but you're welcome to stay. We'll give you first dibs on beating up on Mike a little bit since we're going to talk Tennessee football. I know you would love to do that probably between you and David.
Guys, I think I'm going to check out on you. I got to go pick Ludacris up a couple of cases of coconut water.
Okay. That's first priority. Definitely jump on that. Jeremy, we appreciate it so much, and you're welcome back.
Yep. Take care, guys.
Thanks.
Okay, Mike, we talked Georgia. Good segue to Tennessee. Of course, we got the Florida guy here, too. Let's go to the orange and white and your first impressions of what you saw on Saturday.
So, Mark, I think the top storyline out of Saturday was the injuries. Tennessee had about 24 players that didn't play, a lot of big names. So you can't really tell what the team's going to look like, but it was a great day in Knoxville to get a glimpse of the team. Here's my thing. My observations from a spring game, you have to really be measured in what you take away from a spring game. The game plans are going to, if they scrimmage at all, some teams just do drills. If they scrimmage, the play callings will be very bland, a lot of no contact for a lot of players. So when I look at a spring game, I'm focusing on the individual performances and how key players have gotten better. The three things I focused on Saturday watching the Tennessee game was the offensive line's one-on-one performance against the defensive line. Second, defensive communication, not the shoot scheme, but how the defense communicated with each other. A lot of those fourth quarter collapses last year were because of miscommunication, particularly on the back end, and then consistency in the passing game. So the offensive line is the first thing I'll hit on. I thought the offensive line looked really good. I took away the offensive line's performance as the most positive aspect of Tennessee's.
Uh-oh.
Hopefully Mike's still with us out there. Mike talking some Tennessee football after Tennessee concluded spring drills with the orange and white game. David, your thoughts about what Jeremy had in regards to Georgia football? I know he had some great insight. Hopefully Mike can jump back in, or if you saw Tennessee on Saturday.
I think I hear Mike. Mike, you there before I jump in?
Mark, are you still there?
There we go.
Hey, Mike. Yeah, go right ahead.
Still there?
Hey,
Yep.
Mike, we can hear you.
Okay. Where'd I leave off?
That's a great question. You were talking offensive and defensive line matchups in terms of one-on-one. We heard that. That was about the last thing.
And the shoot.
Yep.
Not unnecessarily shoot, but, defensive communication.
So what I was telling you is there's three groups I focused on when I watched the game on Saturday. One was the offensive line, one-on-one performance against defensive line. Defensive communication, a lot of the breakdowns in fourth quarter last year were because of communication breakdowns, particularly in the back end of the defense, and then consistency in the passing game. So the first thing I looked at was offensive line one-on-one. I thought they did really well. For the past 2 years, the Tennessee offensive line has kind of been hanging on by a thread. They played with a lot of heart, a lot of technique, but they didn't have the depth nor the talent they needed to get to that East Division championship level. The offensive line looked really good on Saturday. They performed very well against a very highly touted defensive line, both in the one-on-one and in the scrimmage sessions. And in particular, Drew Richmond, the very highly touted recruit, looked very good at left tackle. So that's going to be the most positive thing I took away.
I lost him again.
Yeah, I did too. I'll be able to download this and piece it together, so it's not a huge concern for the replay. So I'll just have to wait for him to come back. Yeah, you can hit him on wide receivers and defense, and then I might have one question for him, and we'll wrap it up.
Okay.
Hey, Mike, can you hear us?
Yeah, it stinks that this puts more on you in post.
Yeah, it's not. It won't be pretty, but it'll at
Yeah.
least knock all that stuff out.
Oh,
Especially since I wasn't getting his picture for a lot of that. Hey,
yeah.
Mike, you with
Yeah.
us?
Yeah, am I cutting out?
Yeah,
Yeah,
big time.
Okay.
I'll be able to piece it together. I'll
Okay.
download it and piece it together.
Where did I leave off again? I don't know what the issue is.
That's a. Where did you lead off? Leave off. That's a good question. It's been a while.
Okay.
You were probably only back for 30 or 40 seconds after the last one.
All right, so you want me to start over?
You don't have to start completely over. I'll
Right.
sandwich that together. Yeah, I can't tell you exactly where you were.
I'll
Yeah,
just start off. I'll just start off with the three groups again. How about that? The
All right.
three areas where I focused.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
We were talking about what questions we were going to ask you, and then
Okay. All right, so I'll start over. So, Mark, the three areas I looked at on Saturday were offensive line's performance one-on-one against the defensive line, the defensive communication, and the consistency in the passing game. For the offensive line, I took the offensive line's performance away as the single best positive that came out of Saturday's orange and white game. For the last 2 years, the offensive line has been kind of hanging on by a thread, a lot of heart and a lot of technique, but they haven't had the depth nor the talent that Tennessee needed to compete for the SEC East Championship. The offensive line looked really good in their one-on-one drills and the scrimmage against a highly touted defensive line. In particular, highly touted recruit Drew Richmond looked good at left tackle. Defensive communication last year, many of the fourth quarter collapses last year were due to defensive miscommunication, particularly on the back end, especially that Florida game. You did not see Shoop's scheme on Saturday in Knoxville, but what you did see, particularly in the second half, was the defense really communicating well and being on the same page. That will help that defense close the gap with the rest of the SEC competition. Lastly, the most frustrating thing, as it has been for the last 2 years, was consistency in the passing game, particularly that second, third level. Josh Dobbs had a couple errant throws. He also had a couple drops by the receivers. Having said that, there were only 3 scholarship receivers available for practice on Saturday, so that may have had some impact in the passing game. But again, Vol fans have seen this inconsistency between a very good quarterback and some very highly touted wide receivers for the last 2 years, and it's still frustrating Vol fans. So that's kind of what I took away from Saturday, and would love to field some questions.
Mike, you just hit on it. The wide receivers being injured, you only had 3 there. But did that really help, unearth maybe Preston Williams and Jeff George, or was that something we were probably going to see anyway? Does what they did in the spring game change the outlook and the depth chart at wide receiver? Because those guys, they were making plays that day, catching balls in the red zone and the end zone area. So there were some really impressive plays those 2 guys were making.
Yeah, you're right. Both Preston Williams and Jeff George looked great on Saturday, particularly in some of the one-on-one drills and in the red zone. That's really where they looked best. It helped Jeff George much more than it helped Preston Williams. Preston Williams has a year in the program. He's kind of a known commodity. He's come a long way in the last year, but he was much more of a known commodity. As far as affecting the depth chart, not so much with Preston Williams. You were going to see Preston Williams on the field this year quite a bit. For Jeff George, allowing him to demonstrate in a much more highly competitive environment than in practice, demonstrating what he's capable of and what he can do to the coaches, it probably helped him. It definitely helped him more than Preston Williams, and it may have helped him break in to the rotation early in the season.
And one more, and I'll jump to the other side of the ball. You mentioned we didn't get to see a lot of scheme from what Bob Shoop was going to do on defense, but throughout the spring, you hear some insider reports and stuff, and you're well connected there for the program. Are there going to be any big wholesale changes that we might see? That we definitely didn't see in the game, or is he going to still keep most of what they did and just try and refine what Tennessee has been known for the last couple of years?
Well, the biggest thing you're going to see is he's going to have much more. He's going to utilize a lot more pressure. As far as the way it looks on the field to the average fan, you're not going to see much different as far as alignment and scheme. But what you're going to see is much more pressure. He's going to rely on that athleticism from the defensive backs. The one schematic you will see is his base defense is basically 5 defensive backs. which is a little bit different from where it's been in the past in Knoxville. But he's going to rely. He has that extra defensive back because he puts a lot of pressure on his secondary because he uses pressure up front a lot with blitzes. So that's what you're going to see, and so that pressure is going to result on a lot of situations in the secondary where they're going to have to cover down on the defensive line and the linebackers scheming. So it's going to look a little bit different, a lot more pressure. But schematically, to the average fan, the scheme and alignment is going to look much more like we've run our nickel package in the past.
Hey, Mike, the goal of any program, I would think, between the end of spring practice and getting to that first week of August is basically keep everybody out of trouble and keep them healthy. Besides that, what are you going to want to see out of the gate that first couple sessions in August to get this football team prepared to win a division championship?
Well, I mean, other than healthy and staying out of trouble, those are the two big ones. Easily the most important thing on the field that they have to fix is consistency in the passing game. I talked about it a little bit previously. Josh Dobbs has the ability to throw. He was at about 59% completion rate last year, which is decent. He really needs, I think he needs to be between 64 and 68% for Tennessee to take that next step at competing for the SEC East Championship. But what's kind of deceiving that is the majority of his completions last year were that short 5 yards or less range. Both Jalen Hurd and Alvin Kamara, I think the two of them were in the top 3 or top 4 receivers based on number of receptions last year. So when your two running backs are 2 of your 4 top receivers, that shows you that your passing game is much more in the flats and 5 yards and in, what we would call first-level passes. Where they really need help is getting more consistent in the second, third level. Tight ends over the middle, 10 to 15-yard in routes, and then the deep routes or the deep out routes. Dobbs has the capability to do that. So some of it's on Dobbs and his mechanics and his consistency, but some of it's on the receivers. The receivers have not shown an ability over the last 2 years to get a lot of separation, and they've had several critical drops. So that's the single biggest thing that people are going to be looking for, consistency in the passing game, particularly second, third level throws.
All right, after 9 wins and 4 losses in 2015, of course, Butch Jones trying to parlay those top 5 recruiting classes into something special here in 2016 and avoid that string of excruciating losses, probably to top-level competition, unlike anything we saw out of any team in the country last season for the Vols when you talk that Florida collapse in Gainesville, Alabama on the ropes with the lead with 4 minutes left. On down the line, the Arkansas game, of course, the 14-point lead at home against a team that went to the college football playoff in Oklahoma as well. All right, this is SEC Breakdown. We come your way every Wednesday night, 9 o'clock Eastern Time and 8 o'clock Central. Mike Loveall with SEC Breakdown. Also, Last Word on Sports. Join his work there. Does some great stuff there, as long as David Waters here with SEC Breakdown. Please join us on Twitter. We've got content coming your way each and every day. All right, guys, I think we'll put a wrap on it and see you next week.
We'll see you next week, Mark.